Has the UK got a finance curse?
Is it a trick question? Because the UK doesn't have finance. The City of London has, and it's not part of the UK.
Good answer. Good answer.
Easy.
It's international, he's right.
The City of London is outside the United Kingdom. Do you know that? It's really shocking. And therefore it's also not part of the EU, which explains although it couldn't be part of the EU because you have to have democratic elections, and the City of London doesn't, right? It's the banks that have the votes, right?
Right.
Per staff, you know,
I
the voting
never
system.
knew
How
that.
do you start unpicking this puzzle?
I never knew that. That's a very useful piece of
And
information.
of course, it's not part of
It's a
the
pretty
UK.
dangerous piece of information.
And it's not part of the UK because the Queen is not allowed to enter without permission. She's not the sovereign, therefore it's not part of the UK. It's, you know, and of course that's since 1688.
I have to make a note.
Since the foreign.
A third city-state was officially created in 1982. That city-state is called the District of Columbia and is located on 10 square miles of land in the heart of Washington. The District of Columbia flies its own flag and has its own independent constitution. Although geographically separate, the city-states of London, the Vatican, and the District of Columbia are one interlocking empire called Empire of the City. The flag of Washington's District of Columbia has 3 red stars, one for each city-state in the 3-city empire. This corporate empire of 3 city-states controls the world economically through London's inner city, militarily through the District of Columbia, and spiritually through the Vatican. The Constitution for the District of Columbia operates under a tyrannical Roman law known as Lex Fori, which bears no resemblance to the U.S. Constitution. When Congress passed the Act of 1871, it created a separate corporate government for the District of Columbia. This treasonous act allowed the District of Columbia to operate as a corporation outside the original Constitution of the United States and outside of the best interests of American citizens. A sobering study of the signed treaties and charters between Britain and the United States exposes a shocking truth. The United States has always been, and still is, a British Crown colony. King James I was famous not for just changing the Bible into the King James Version, but for signing the first Charter of Virginia in 1606. That charter granted America's British forefathers a license to settle and colonize America. The charter also guaranteed that future kings and queens of England would have sovereign authority over all the citizens and colonized land in America stolen from the Indians. After America declared its independence from Great Britain, the Treaty of 1783 was signed. That treaty specifically identifies the King of England as the Prince of the United States and contradicts the belief that America won the War of Independence. Although King George III of England gave up most of his claims over his American colonies, he kept his right to continue receiving payment for his business venture of colonizing America. If America had really won the War of Independence, they would never have agreed to pay debts and reparations to the King of England. When Congress passed the 13th Amendment to the Constitution, the U.S. President was made subservient to the King of England. The 13th Amendment is called the Title of Nobility Amendment and forbids U.S. presidents and their officials from using royal titles like king or prince or baron. For some mysterious reason, the 13th Amendment, which was ratified in 1810, no longer appears on current copies of the Constitution. America's blood-soaked War of Independence against the British bankrupted America and turned its citizens into permanent debt slaves of the king. In the War of 1812, the British torched and burned to the ground the White House and all U.S. government buildings and destroyed ratification records of the U.S. Constitution. 1 century later, a corrupt U.S. Congress committed the biggest theft in world history. They passed Paul Warburg's Federal Reserve Act in 1913, handing over America's gold and silver reserves and total control of America's economy to the Rothschild banksters. Most Americans still believe that the Fed, or Federal Reserve, is the government. It is not. The Fed is a privately owned banking system whose majority Class A shareholders are the Rothschilds, Warburgs, Kuhn and Loeb, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, Israel Seif, and the Lehman Brothers. This private banking cartel is the Fed and is never audited and never pays taxes. They print and design America's money, which displays their symbols of an Egyptian pyramid, a Masonic all-seeing eye, and the words "In God We Trust." Who exactly is the God they trust? They also collect American taxpayers' money through the IRS. Then they loan it back again with interest to pay for roads, bridges, and other public works. American presidents are handpicked and financed by these special interest power groups. Like George W. Bush, John Forbes Kerry, whose initials are JFK, is a member of Yale University's Skull and Bones Brotherhood. The Forbes part of John Kerry's name identifies his descendancy from Captain Robert Bennett Forbes, who was a drug runner for the Rothschilds' opium drug trade with China in the 1800s. Most U.S. citizens believe that the United States is a country and that the President is the most powerful man on earth. The United States is not a country. It is a corporation, and the President is President of the Corporation of the United States. He and his elected officials work for the corporation, not for the American people. Since the United States is a corporation, who owns the corporation of the United States? Like Canada and Australia, whose leaders are prime ministers of the Queen, and whose land is called Crown Land, the United States is just another Crown colony. Crown colonies are controlled by the empire of 3 city-states. At the center of each city-state is a towering, phallic-shaped stone monument called an obelisk that points skyward. In D.C. city-state, the obelisk, known as the Washington Monument, was dedicated to Freemason George Washington by the Freemason Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia.
The World Bank, Karin Hudes, we're going to bring you the conclusion of yesterday's interview. Karin, welcome back.
You'll remember that President Lincoln was assassinated by a Jesuit. Mm-hmm. That was in order to prevent the greenback dollars that Lincoln had issued directly by the Treasury Department. And so what happened was the bank of that day was then able to continue to earn interest on the currency of the United States. That was why he was assassinated. It's in favor of the banks. It's certainly not in favor of the people. What happens when you have a child is your child is given a Social Security number. They estimate how many taxes your child is going to pay over his or her lifetime. And they take that birth certificate and they issue it on the capital markets and they earn money on it.
Okay, so what you're saying is that the birth certificate itself creates a monetary value on the books with the Federal Reserve?
I'm saying something much worse, actually. What I'm saying is that when every citizen goes into the court system, they are not seen there as themselves a U.S. citizen. They're seen as the person who had their birth certificate pledged. You're there as a debtor. You're not there as a citizen.
So, because of the national debt, are you saying that Americans they're just born into debt and there's nothing that they can really do about it? They're debtors in the system.
We have been converted from human beings that are citizens of the Republic of the United States into chattel. Chattel, that is a legal term for something which is property. We are now considered to be property of the Federal Reserve. We're not considered to be human beings and citizens of the United States.
That's a very strong statement. How do we reverse that? If that is in fact the true statement, how do we reverse that?
The first thing we do is we recognize it. We understand it. And then the second thing we do is we have that constitutional convention, which is our right under our first constitution, and we repeal that banker's constitution. We repeal it, we get rid of it, we do not want it, we do not need it, and we issue our treasury dollars backed by the gold out of the collateral account that has been offered to us. Because the federal courts, the judges, are not sitting there in courts of equity. They're secretly treating us as if we are property of the United States. When we come in there, we are not there in a court of equity. So yes, it is a different arrangement with our government. What it means is that when you go to court to protect your rights, you don't even get to first base because that judge is not sitting in what you call a court of equity. They're not looking at you as if you're a citizen of the United States. They're handling you as if you're a person who's just servicing the debt of the United States. You're there as a thing.
So anyway, getting back to the Federal Reserve and the Bank for International Settlements, these groups are in cahoots with the biggest crooks of all, the Jesuits that bought up Bank of America, and they have little secret deals to try to apportion the riches of the world. And in the meantime, all of the countries of the world know that this thievery is going on, and we have been working together. I've been writing all of the ambassadors for the last 5 years since I was fired illegally. They knew I was their lawyer. They knew I was telling them the truth. And I said, you're not going to get away with this. And there's a group of World Bank whistleblowers from different countries, and one of them in particular, Elaine Colville, who's Scottish. The two of us have been writing to the UK Parliament, and the UK Parliament on the 20th of July just published our statements. My statement was, okay, guys, we're running out of time. It's time to get serious and tell these thugs and crooks that they're fired. And Elaine Colville said, the UK Parliament better do its job. And that's up there for everybody to read. Because I can tell you, and you didn't follow up on one of the things I just said, so I'll say it again. We are talking about the biggest thuggery of all, and that is the Jesuits in the Vatican. That's right. Greg, I'm going to tell you something which I just found out about, because let me step back a little bit and say how I got involved in all of this. They say follow the money. That's what I did. I saw that people were being lied to about the money, and you're not allowed to do that. When bonds are issued on the capital markets, and I bought a World Bank bond, you're entitled to accurate financial statements, and they were not being audited according to the auditing standards. So I sued the World Bank, and I sued KPMG, and then 188 ministers of finance settled my lawsuit. But I couldn't get that thing implemented. So I was trying to find out why not. And let me tell you what I just found out. I always thought that the CIA was the problem and the other intelligence agencies. Guess what? There's a grand intelligence agency that the Vatican puts out, and all of those other crooks are operating under the Vatican intelligence agency.
The money
That's
is
what's
about
going on.